According to a McKinsey Global Institute report earlier this year, globalization has been a powerful force for economic growth. Goods, services, finance, data, and people moving across borders adds to GDP and fuels productivity growth. And China has been one of the world's major beneficiaries. And as exports surged from just $257 billion in 2000 to $2.4 trillion in 2016, China has become the world's top exporter. Here to discuss the impacts of this new era of globalization, please welcome Victor Fung, Henk Paulson, and Frans van Houten with Fortune's Nina Easton. And first, we'll hear a special message from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Greetings to the Fortune Global Forum. Thank you for your focus on openness and innovation. Science and technology are transforming our world, and they have brought much good. A growing global middle class, fewer people in extreme poverty, access to better health care and education, but there has been unintended damage. And I would highlight two: climate change and growing inequality. The good news is that science is on our side. Innovation and technology are delivering new ways to fight poverty, expand education, and green our planet. The United Nations is committed to building a world of sustainability, prosperity, and peace. Let us ensure that the fourth industrial revolution is a force for good, for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Welcome to our last panel of the day. And boy, it's truly an esteemed panel. We have seen so much dramatic change in globalization, really even in just the past year, the political dynamics of it as well as the economic dynamics. So our panel is going to drill down on that and also provide some good advice to global leaders, global business leaders on operating in this new environment. Henk, I wanted to start with you as somebody who is obviously somebody who has deep, deep China experience and a former cabinet secretary, but you also wrote a book on how to deal with China. With China professing to be the driver of globalization now, is that something that you would approach differently?
Well, obviously, there are certain things that stay the same and certain things that are different. And obviously, this is a different China that global companies are operating in, multinational companies are, than they were 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. But certain things are still the same. And one of them is, I get asked all the time by global companies, how do we get a good management team? How do we do this or that? And what I say to them is you have to begin by putting your very best people here. And that was the same as it was years ago. Not put someone who you think you can spare, but you have to put someone here to figure it out and work it out on the ground. And there are huge opportunities, but there are huge challenges. And it's becoming more complicated and difficult all the time. If you're a global company, there's a whole new set of regulations that you need to figure out. There's still not a level playing field, but there's big opportunity.
And broadly speaking, I mean, previously the U.S. was seen as the driver of globalization. What do you think about U.S.-China relations today?
Wow. Okay. Well, I would say, Nina, frankly, I'm a bit concerned when I look at U.S.-China relations. Start with the positive. At the top, the two heads of state, two presidents, have a good relationship and a good rapport. And what does that mean? That means if they're really difficult, complicated issues like North Korea, there's a greater possibility of making progress on those. But then there are many other significant issues that need to be dealt with, and that takes good people on each team, to work together. So as I look at it today, one of the things that disturbs me or concerns me is I see, other than North Korea, I don't see what the issues are, even though we have many issues where there are shared interests, where you see the two sides working together collaboratively toward a common goal. And so we have a situation where President Trump campaigned on, rebalancing trade and the economic relations, and I'm all for that. And so it shouldn't be any surprise that you get the answer you get on market economy status, or the aluminum trade case, or the 301 investigation, or the national security legislation making its way through Congress that is more or less targeted toward China. But the thing that is missing is, where are the areas that we're working together, okay? And why aren't we working on bilateral investment that's going to create jobs? What about working together to solve environmental problems and helping the U.S. Export more environmental goods and services to China, or working on export capacity, or opening up key markets? So again, as I look at it, President Trump is just about to have his first and really only major domestic legislative achievement, which is tax reform. And when that is behind him, and that's done, I think he's naturally going to turn to his domestic constituents, and he's going to focus on foreign policy and trade areas where he can do things unilaterally. That's going to bring trade tension. And what you'd like to have is then some, I liked the comprehensive economic dialogue. That has stalled, right? And yet that's got the potential. You need some system, some mechanism for organizing and prioritizing and keeping the relationship on an even keel while you're going to have the trade issues. So again, I don't mean to be overly negative. I keep coming back here regularly. I'm an optimist. I believe that there's a lot our two countries can do together. But I'm concerned because I would, as encouraged as I am by what I see at the top, I just think we need some kind of, we need more momentum around things that we're working on together, particularly in the economic area.
So Victor, I turn to you. By the way, Victor started his company here in Guangzhou, right?
My grandfather did.
Your grandfather.
1906.
Your
It's
company was
111 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm not that old.
I know. I didn't mean to say that. Your company was started here, and you can't believe how much this city has changed.
Oh, absolutely.
And how you were saying how beautiful it is. And
no, absolutely.
Gardens. And,
for 1,000 years, I think Guangzhou has been the trade gateway to China.
Yeah.
And I think it's really reestablishing itself in this role in the digital age.
That's great. And I want to drill down on that in just a minute. But let's follow up on what Hank said. You are not just a businessman, you're a thought leader. And you really have done some extraordinary thinking on what's going on in the global economy. So when we look at the rise of populism, the rise of nationalism, what's going on between U.S.-China relations, where are things and where should they be going, in terms of U.S.-China relations especially?
Well, I think Hank has it absolutely right. I think what we are doing now is we're in a world that is rather complex. It is not a zero-sum game. That's the thing that we really want to emphasize. It is a complex non-zero-sum game, which means we have areas in which we compete and we have areas in which we cooperate. And I think we've got to get the balance right. And if you actually want to compete in every area, you're turning a non-zero-sum game into a zero-sum game, and that is not good for anybody in the world. So really, what I think we need to do more is to encourage perhaps more contact at the business-to-business level and track 2 level, not just depend on G2G. And I think where we can do is create a lot more human contact, person-to-person contact, business-to-business contact, that would actually cement this idea that we can actually do things together that will be of mutual benefit. There will be areas that we will compete. Let's be a realist there.
So Frans, you run a Dutch company you've really pivoted that company to move into a more innovative future with medical devices and healthcare technology, and you're betting big on China, right?
Well, you could say for sure we are a global company because only 1% of my revenue is in my home country.
Oh,
the rest
wow,
is all
that's
global.
incredible. It's
But
really cool.
so we are large in the United States, we are large in China. We call China our second home. In fact, we have been in this country for over 100 years and onshore since 32 years. And we call it second home because we want to ingrain in everybody's mind that we need to be local. We need to be locally relevant. We do R&D here, manufacturing, sales, service, the whole shebang. The Filippo brand, Phillips in Chinese, Filippo, is very well known. And if you're relevant, you keep on having demand. Now, how do you stay relevant? That's the big question here. You know, companies die. The average tenure of a S&P company is now down to 18 years, I think.
Yeah.
Right? So companies need to reinvent it themselves. So have we done that. So several years ago, we made pivot where we said we will exit segments that are commoditizing. We are an innovation company. We need to focus on the unmet needs. What are the world's unmet needs? Climate, you know, energy, health. Okay, health. So we said we take health because we have a good establishment in that, and we're going to build on it. In fact, we're going to double down on it. So we sold our lighting division, which was, you know, our birthright, right? Mm-hmm. We sold out our television and we put everything on health, where we started to double up on health informatics, big data, artificial intelligence. We started to connect the dots between doctors and consumers in a new way, because what healthcare needs is actually to drive better output within the same amount of money. There's not more money for healthcare. We need to drive better outcomes for people and higher productivity. And technology will play a huge role in that. And so it's a very fulfilling mission to do that, and it has made us relevant, and that's why we grow.
So let me ask this question of all of you, but starting with you, Frans. Where is China on that road? George Yip wrote the book, From Imitator to Innovator. As a source of innovation, where do you see China right now?
Well, you know, we were just talking about maybe a three-phase model where first China was the location for cheap manufacturing, right? And then it became also a consumption place, you know, the growing middle class, fantastic domestic market. And I was here not so long ago with my management team, and we said, you know, China is now moving in the phase of innovation. You know, the next wave of innovation may well come from here. No longer do you do technology transfers from the West to China. It could be the reverse. So we are going to double up on our R&D commitment to China, because I believe there is great talent here, but also the will and the creativity, especially in the digital domain, to maybe go faster than Europe or the United States.
Hank, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I very much agree with it. And there are areas where China is leading right now. When you're looking at you know, electric vehicles, or you're looking at moving toward a cashless society. And there are other areas where they're still behind, but they're definitely catching up, and that raises, and so I think that's very good for China. It's very good for the world, but I think also, as China becomes more of a developer of intellectual property, rather than just being an assimilator, I think you're going to see a greater emphasis on intellectual property protection. And I think that's going to be important. But I also think as China is making progress here, there's going to be more resistance, and rightfully so, from some of this, you know, indigenous innovation. And the idea that that foreign companies are forced to transfer technology. So again, I see it as a positive and, you know, real progress for China and for the world. But there continue to be some issues.
But I also see opportunities. I mean, back to what Victor said about businesses collaborating. Yeah. You know, we live in an era where innovation goes very fast, and you better collaborate, right? So open innovation, while protecting each other's intellectual property, is a good way. So what we have done is we have used our IntelliSpace kind of, you know, artificial intelligence diagnostics platform have opened it up with APIs, and we invite local companies to build apps on top of it. And so now it becomes an ecosystem where we need each other, right? Which is kind of nice. And I think that's a way forward to tap into the capacity of a market without necessarily fighting each other.
And Victor, and you talk about the Greater Bay Area.
Well, I like to make 2 points. I totally agree with what Frans and Hank was saying. I think, first of all, we need to focus on the Chinese consumer. I think the Chinese consumer is actually fast becoming the most discriminating consumer in the world. It's absolutely technology enabled. The average Chinese is spending 4 or 5 hours, on the phone and on the web every day. It is actually a very well-to-do market at a very much younger age. We think that the sweet spot for spending is at least 10 years younger in China. And then finally, that means it's a very active customer. And finally, it's the outbound Chinese that are traveling. 110 million Chinese traveling abroad last year. It's forecast in the next 5 years to go to 200 million. And they get a lot of external exposure. So the net of all that is we're seeing a lot of new business models, especially the technologically driven, the O2O, the omni-channel type models being developed in China.
And you're doing it.
Well, we're actually participating in it. But we think that, as Frans was saying, we need to actually look at what's happening in China for its application to other parts of the world. And that's very important. Now, the second point I'd like to just touch on very quickly is, I think the leadership has now embarked on another really, after the 19th Congress, another view of China in the next stage of development, roughly from 2020 to 2050. The key at this stage in China's development is sustainable growth. China stood up in the era from 1949 to 1979, and then from 1980 to 2020, basically grew very prosperous and large. Now I think it's in sustainable growth. In that respect, I think the key is the focus on innovation. The focus also then, of course, on health, the focus on sustainability, climate, etc. So in that respect, I think there's a lot of government encouragement of innovation. And I think that is going to be another factor that would actually come into this entire mix.
How will the Belt and Road Initiative shift the dynamics of globalization? I combine that with the fact, and this isn't exactly related, but the fact that Justin Trudeau was here and is clearly trying to bond with China, and the U.S. is not part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's more like the U.S. being left out of the action is what I'm getting at here.
So, to me, it's in many ways breathtaking. I was here for the for the event in early July, and it's written into the Constitution, and I think it's become a symbol for China and globalization. And so when you look at it writ large, it's roughly 65 nations, 29% of global GDP, 60% of the population. So it is huge. And to get to your question, Nina, I think the key for this to be really, to be an open process is to be open to foreign competition. So you get buy-in from foreign companies, from suppliers. I think I want to get to what Victor said about sustainability, because I've been really, one of the most extraordinary changes I've seen is the focus on the environment in this country. And I would like to see the same focus on the environment as China builds infrastructure around the world and builds power plants and so on. So I think here there's an opportunity, and this is one thing that my institute is working on green financing principles. And so I'd like to see also a focus on financial sustainability, and that means that when you're building infrastructure in certain countries, you want to make sure you don't pile them too high with debt when you do that. So again, I think this can make a huge contribution, but there's going to be big focus on it. It is, as I said, the world is going to be watching what China does there, and I think it's obviously very welcome to the countries that are receiving it, and if done in the right way, it could be a boon for the whole world.
I'd love to get some questions from the audience, so raise your hand and we'll continue until you get a mic to you. Frans, what about the China and healthcare technology, and where is that going, not just inside China, but outside China?
Well, the China health technology industry is developing rapidly. Now, that's competition, but we all need to innovate, no problem. I would like to make a pivot to the China health strategy, which is basically their 2030 health strategy, where China has put a North Star there to say from curative sick care, we need to get to big health, right? Basically preventative care and so on, and avoid that people need to go to hospitals. And in order to get there, there's a strategy, which is again nice, because now you have a North Star and then you get a plan, right? And the plan involves creating huge data lakes around health. Now just imagine what those data lakes can be used for. To optimize care, to get to best practice, but also to maybe develop pharmaceuticals, because now you get insight on over 1 billion people and how their disease is evolving in relation to their DNA. And you can just see how the health strategy not only is going to be great for the people, but is also going to be foundational for a whole new wave of industrial innovation, for example, around pharma. Right, so I think we can expect the Chinese health tech and pharma industries to develop rapidly over the next years. Which, as Western companies, we can then say, you know, we are going to be local and therefore we are going to be part of it. But as, let's say, foreign nationals, I think other regions better, you know, do something similar. You know, where's the North Star in Europe, right? Or are we going to stay divided country by country? Yeah. Right? Because I think in the end you need to mobilize your talent and intellect in order to get ahead. And that is what China is doing very well.
Victor?
You know, I'd like to just add to the Belt and Road, and I totally agree with what Hank has said. On the one level, it's a very, really important multilateral initiative. But I'd like to give a perspective from a business standpoint. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to the businessman? I think it's important for us to recognize that, yes, right now we're talking about connectivity and building infrastructure, you know, and also the financing of infrastructure. I'd like to ask the question, okay, in 5 years, after the infrastructure is built, what's going to flow? The goods, the people, the information, you know, the funds, etc. You know, and what we really need to do is recognize how we can use the Belt and Road for the flow. And here, I'd just like to mention one thing. I think the world's consumption pattern is changing dramatically. It used to be, I'm going back to 1980, the whole world basically is focusing on the consumption in the OECD markets. 84% of global consumption was in OECD. So we as a world, you know, sort of a global trader, we've sourced in the East and we sold in the West. Source in the East and sell in the West, and the containers will come back empty. But now I think that's very, very much changing. The middle class growing in the developing economies have shifted the balance of that consumption. And we're now finding new markets and new consumption in the developing economies. Right. And that's very important. But how do you access that? The fact of the matter is the Belt and Road connecting the 60-some countries is a platform that would access about 80%, in our view, of this new consumption.
You know, it's interesting.
And so for the next 30 years, it's going to be crucial.
George needs a mic over here. And what's interesting about the Belt and Road Initiative, by the way, and the U.S. being left out theme that I'm hitting on here, is that most people in the U.S. have never heard of the Belt and Road, have no idea that this is going on. Nobody in the media talks about it. Nobody, like, politicians don't talk about it. No one knows what it is, which is pretty extraordinary. George.
George Gibb, co-author of China from Imitation to Innovation. Meneer van Houten, goedemiddag. What does Phillips find to be the strengths and weaknesses of Chinese R&D staff?
well, we're going from weakness to strength now, right? So, but let's say creativity used to be one of the challenges, but in the digital age, that's gone, right? And this is where China is leapfrogging, and actually we see on the digital side innovation that is stronger than in the Western world, more so than maybe on the traditional physical hardware side.
We have a question right here in front. Where are mics? Yes, thank you. And I just identify yourself, thanks.
Christine Lam, I'm the sort of C group representative here in China. In listening to the panel and just generally other who have spoken today, I sort of read a much more, I would say, a constructive view of China amongst business people. Maybe it's because it's a bias sample. We're all here because we are positive about China, but versus maybe the government level read, it seems to be more suspicious at the government level. I wonder if the panel would agree with my observations, and if so, what would be your suggestions in terms of what we in the business community can do to help maybe bridge those gaps?
And I would add to Christine's point, the business people who are here, who are naturally have a relationship and an affinity for China, I'm not sure you'd find all that positive from a lot of Western businesses too, so if you could address that.
Yeah, so I will speak there because I'm a former businessman and I worked in government, and I believe and now I do not-for-profit things, but I work very closely with business. And I'm a big, big believer about economic linkages, business linkages. As you know, Jack Ma said this morning, when you have trade, you don't have war. So I'm all for that. But I would say many big multinational companies that are outside of China, doing business in China, are finding it more and more difficult to do business in China because the market's getting bigger, it's getting more attractive, and many of them are making good money in the market, but the market isn't open to many industries. So they're not able to come in. They have to work with a joint venture partner. They look at some of the way the anti-monopoly law works, or the way the new national security law work, or the way standards work, and it's not a level playing field. And so what you're starting to hear much more of, and you're hearing this in the U.S. and you're hearing it in Europe, the idea of reciprocity. In other words, I used to, when I was Treasury Secretary, I used to say to my Chinese counterparts, Wang Xishong and Wu Yi, I would say to them, look, I believe in free trade. And I believe the U.S. benefits from exports to China and from imports. But there are many people, there are dislocations that come from trade, and many people in my country disagree. It'll be easier for me to keep our markets open for you if you continue to open your markets to us. And now, right now, we're hearing reciprocity, and I happen to believe if we don't see in some of the big, important industries where the U.S. is a leader, if we don't see those markets start to open up, you're then going to see big parts of the global economy closed off to China and the rest of the world. So I don't think that would be good. Now, there are positive signs. I was pleased to see the China's begin to open up the capital markets. Okay, that's a positive sign. But I said to myself, why 51%? Why not 100%? A U.S. financial institution can go, can just about anywhere else go and have 100%. And that would, and it's hard to run a joint venture. You know, it's hard enough to run an investment bank if you got 100% control. And so I would say, why wouldn't China want, if they want to have world-class capital markets, why wouldn't they want to have world-class investors and bankers and investment bankers here? Why do they have to still keep propping up the domestic industry? And so that's the other side. And you're getting it from someone who has been a big advocate of economic reform in China. And I see there's been a lot of progress. I would like to see it. And so I think the other thing that business looks at, which would surprise me, you have outstanding companies in China, outstanding companies now. I think the private sector has done wonders, and that's the future of China. But you still have tens of thousands of inefficient state-owned enterprises piling up mounds of debt. Okay, and so when you prop up those companies, it slows everything down. So there are positive things, but I'm answering your question. And so your question is, why, can't multinational companies do more to convince their governments? I actually think multinational companies are complaining to their governments rather than being a source. They come here and they say good things, right? If I was running a multinational company, I wouldn't come up with any negatives when I was talking here. I would do that in private. So, and the thing I love about this country is you can be very, very candid in private. And there's a lot of positive things. So anyway, that's the answer to your question.
I know Victor wants to respond, but I have one quick question. What's your perspective on how open the Belt and Road Initiative is?
We have to wait and see, right? China says it's going to be open, but I think it's early days of that. And I look at it and say the world needs infrastructure. Okay, the U.S. doesn't build infrastructure. The U.S. more or less doesn't fund infrastructure, and this could be a very good thing, but it will need to be open, and I think open to all sorts of foreign companies and suppliers. And again, I made the other points I made about environmental sustainability and financial stability. So I just think that this is going to get a lot of scrutiny, because you don't hear about it much right in the U.S. today, but it's huge. It's written into the Constitution. China is serious about it, so there's going to be a microscope on it. The world's going to look at it, and we will see. And I'm cautiously optimistic.
Victor, sorry.
My view, Nina, is the Belt and Road system will be totally open. China cannot do this on its own. In fact, I would look at just the other way around. This is really a beginnings of a new effort to create a new multilateral system for the world. And really it's the participation, it's a Chinese idea, yes, but there's no way, even with the amount of investments that the Chinese can make, to actually do it alone. The needs, as sort of pointed out by ADB and everybody else, is completely many times what China itself can afford. So it is a system that will actually be totally open. And I think, to answer the original question, I just want to add a very quick point. I think, in today's world, I think what we really need now is a rebuilding of the multilateral system. And again, having a rule-based system that will not deteriorate into a number of bilaterals. And then businessmen in their own respective countries complaining about unfair competition. What we really need is transparent, open system. And the question in my mind is, it is now about time for us to rebuild that multilateral system. But how? I think it needs leadership. It needs leadership from the US, from China, from Europe, and others. And I think this is the time to do it. And the Belt and Road perhaps is, in fact, that concrete experiment that would actually be the example on which the new multilateral system can be built.
Frans, what's your take on Hank's criticisms?
Well, I think there's still room for further leveling the playing field. It depends a little bit by industry segment. At the same time, sometimes companies also complain, but actually they're not competitive, right? So we need to sort through this issue, make sure that we are competitive and really try And it is a complex market. You need to be local to be successful. You cannot just expect that you can sell something without making the effort. But I agree with Henk that there's also areas where, let's say, we can go further. Now, if I go to Beijing and we discuss it, then you always get the same commitment. We are WTO, we are heading there, and it is our belief, Chinese belief, in a global setup. So, and I think that's where we are heading.
So we've run out of time. I still want to have each one of you give a piece of advice to global leaders in today's world, whether it's investing in China or just navigating this new era. What's the one big piece of advice you would leave? Victor.
Well, I think in this era of innovation and dramatic change with digitalization and so on, I think nobody has the real answers. The only way to do is to really create a culture of rapid experimentation and really keep on testing new ideas, find the environments. You were talking about the Explorium, which we have, which is our lab to test retailing in Shanghai. And we just keep on testing new O2O, omni-channel ideas in that particular lab, how to use technology, etc. I think that is the only way to move forward in today's world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of change, but some things never change. And the key to success is hiring the very best people from around the globe, coming up with a culture for integrating them, getting them to work together, and being in an environment where they can be creative, where people can speak what's on their mind. And I still it really comes down also to integrity. Having an environment where people want to, not only obey the law and know they have to obey the law, but do the right things. And that tone is set at the top. But remember, there's certain things that you're never going to change. Those are your core values. Everything else you have to be prepared to change and need to change as the environment changes, and particularly when you're working in China, because the amazing thing about this place is I come regularly, and every time I come I learn something new, and there's dramatic change, and it's really exhilarating to be here. It makes it fun and interesting, but it's all about people and culture.
Excellent.
Very smart words. I agree with them. Let's just go do it.
So, speaking of which, thank you all for being here for this incredible day. This is our final session. However, the buses are downstairs, ready to leave for dinner. They're going to take us to the Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall. Please remember to wear your credential so you can get in and out of the buses and the hall. Leave your headsets here. Thank you to our panel, and have a great dinner.